Hello and welcome to the Life by Design podcast, brought to you by Strategic. This podcast is all about helping you live your great life. Each episode will feature insights from our Chief Investment Officer, Doug Walters. In addition, we'll also have a guest interview. This week, we have Greg Mattacola, Senior Advisor and Partner here at Strategic. All right, well, we're back, and I've got Doug here again for Weekly Insights. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you.
So, Doug, this week, I've been hearing a lot about this thing called corrections,
Right.
and being in corrections territory. And what does that mean for us and for our clients?
Right. Well, it's a term that the media loves to use because it sounds really scary. Technically, and it is pretty arbitrary, but technically it means the market is down 10% from a peak.
Yeah.
So that's really all that a correction is. And whenever we hit it, you will see all of the media sort of jumping on it as this big moment. We're in correction territory, and it does create a bit of emotion out there.
Is this something that is a pretty regular happenstance and something that we've seen often over the course of several years or however long you're necessarily looking at the market?
Yeah, it's not that unusual. If we think about the last few years, in fact, it's probably more unusual to have a year where we don't have a correction. 2024 was one of those years we had no correction. The market pretty much just sort of steadily rose. But if you look at 2023, we had a correction. 2022, which was a down year, we had multiple corrections, multiple times where we sort of peaked and then went down by 10%. 2020, obviously, big correction. We all know what caused that. And so if you're looking at those 5 years as representative, kind of one a year.
1 year. Okay.
Right.
And is this, I'm sure there's a lot of different factors, but most likely uncertainty is one of the big factors that kind of drives corrections.
Right. Yeah. The market is always trying to price in the best information it has. And when that information becomes uncertain, the sort of default is to pull back a bit. If we don't know what's going to happen, let's take the foot off the gas a little bit. That's going to hit the market. And so when uncertainty rises, that tends to impact markets. That's not always the cause of a correction, but it certainly does contribute.
So then the market is almost reacting the same way. If I was watching the news every day, the market's reacting the same way and trying to anticipate something that it heard on the government shutdown as an example, like, oh, if that happens, we need to be prepared for that by doing X, Y, and Z.
Right. And it's important to say, we always use this term, the market, right?
Yeah.
It's investors,
Right.
There
Yeah.
are millions of investors who are interpreting this data. And if they start to get nervous about what that data says, and sometimes that nervousness is just about, the data is uncertain, right? When that uncertainty rises, there's going to be a bigger discount applied to the market. And that, again, is the accumulation of millions of investors reacting to that information. The market is always trying to, investors are always trying to price in what they think, what they think the valuation of the market should be.
And then does that apply similarly to like consumer sentiment? And is it very similar to that? Like, how does that factor in as well, and how the consumer feels?
Yeah, it is related. Oftentimes, consumer sentiment is a lagging indicator. The market going down kind of brings consumer sentiment down. I actually had a colleague who once said that the only thing that consumer sentiment can predict is consumer sentiment, meaning it's lagging, right? It's a reflection of people's feelings. People's feelings when it comes to the economy are often driven by the market.
And so as we look around the world, what kind of things are we seeing outside of the United States?
Well, we are seeing, in terms of market performance, we're seeing actually really good performance outside of the U.S. And that is coming in two forms for us who are investing here in the U.S. in dollars. It's coming in two forms. One is just perhaps a more positive outlook in the sense that, if you think about Europe, for example, it's already coming from a position of being better value. When we think about the U.S., we think about the Magnificent Seven, a very expensive market in general. Europe is sort of the opposite. It is a way to play value. So there's, a little bit more better sentiment in terms of valuation. The other thing that we've seen happen is that the dollar has weakened. And for us U.S. investors, the dollar weakening is going to raise the price of international equities. So we get to be a benefit of that. And year to date, I think that number is somewhere between 4 and 5%.
Yeah. And so from this past weekly insights, and for those of you who don't know, you can read all of Doug's weekly insights on our website under the resources. But you opened up with stocks ended the week in the red for the fourth week in a row, and for the sixth time in 7 weeks. The S&P 500 officially dipped into correction territory. The Magnificent Seven have become the mediocre seven, and that's generous. Tariffs are high and consumer sentiment is low. And you should forget everything I just said.
Right. Right. And really the message there is just don't get caught in the emotion of these headlines. Everything we're seeing year to date, while not fun, is quite normal. We talked about, corrections happen on average once a year. And I should say, when we think about those last 5 years, with those corrections, with the pandemic, investors earned about 17% in U.S. equities per year during that time period. So it's worth taking a step back, remembering that these things happen, but patient investors have benefited from that market going up. And smart investors are going to be those that don't shy away from these markets, but start to see opportunity. Really, the way to think about a market falling is it's becoming less expensive. You would never go to the store and see, the price of your favorite object you're looking to buy falling and being like, oh, forget it, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh, right, now's the time to buy, right? And it really is no different with investments, unless you think, structurally, the world is coming to an end. No, companies, we live in a capitalist country. Companies are here to make profits. They're going to find a way to make profits. So if we start to see the market sell off, look for those opportunities to bargain hunt.
Yeah, and I think you said it last week, and I think it's a repeatable thing, is that from your perspective, it's not that you're looking to tell the future or that specifically that something's going to work out. It's just that the opportunity there is great when stuff starts to fall off, and so buying low, quote unquote, is going to be better than buying when it's already rising, right? And there's the hopes that, and like you said, that most companies are looking to be profitable, so ideally they're going to get back on track.
Right. Yeah, and the systematic way to take advantage of that is with a diversified portfolio. Again, we didn't predict that international was going to be outperforming the U.S. by so much this year, but a diversified portfolio allows you to take advantage of that. And that systematic rebalancing allows you to sell high and buy low. So as we see international outperforming, when we do a rebalance, we're going to be locking some of that outperformance in, and we're going to be buying whatever's been underperforming. So that's a nice way to systematically take advantage of it. And then if we were to see the market continue to fall to a point where there's a real valuation opportunity, that's when we can get really tactical.
And so, looking to the week ahead, not necessarily, I think after both the conversations of these two podcasts, hey, maybe people listening out there don't look at the market and don't look at the news as closely. But what are we seeing for the next week ahead for the investment team here?
For the investment team?
Yeah.
That's a tough question. I mean, we are always, we're really doing the same thing every week, which is being vigilant, being prepared. That may sound boring, but every day we are trying to prepare for the next day. And that means making sure the portfolios are properly rebalanced, that they are well diversified, that if an opportunity starts to open up, that we're taking advantage of it. And again, a boring answer, but it is the same thing that we do every day, is really just prepare for that next day, prepare for that next week, and be ready for whatever the market throws at us. Again, what we are not doing, and I'll sort of underline it, you said it earlier, we are not predicting what is happening certainly over the next week, let alone the next year. We're just going to take advantage of whatever the market offers us.
Yeah. And I know that was a little bit of a trick question, but I figured I knew the answer to that. But the idea here is for folks at home who are listening, who may be a little stressed out at the news and everything that's going on. It's there's a plan in place. We're following the plan, and we follow it every day the same, and every week the same. That's why it's in place, and that's why we do what we do here.
Right. Yeah. And it's a great point. We do get that question quite a bit. Market's going down. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
We've already done it. It is the same thing that we do every day.
Yeah. And it's going back to last week in that evidence-based investing and just really trusting the system and trusting how that works.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, and Doug, you had a little funny thing in your investment this week about St. Patrick's Day. So what about St. Patrick's Day made you excited this week?
Well, I think you're talking about gold.
Yeah.
So yeah, we like to, joke, hopefully you'll find it, that gold at the end of the rainbow. But if you don't, you will find it in your portfolio. We do have gold in there as a diversifier, and as luck would have it, gold is the best performer, not only on the year, but over the last year plus. It's been a great diversifier.
Great. Well, and again, diversification. So whether or not it is or it isn't, we should be ready for that. So,
right. Exactly.
Moving forward. All right, Doug. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks, Jay. Take care.
Hello and welcome back. I'm here with Greg. Welcome back, Greg. Last week, you heard us talk about behavioral financing and finances and what that is. And we kind of hit the tip of the iceberg. Would you say, Greg? Right?
I would say so. There's so much more.
Yeah.
But we also don't want to put you to sleep either. So it's a delicate dance.
Yeah, that's right. And Greg's very passionate about this. And so I'm sure he wanted to go deeper. But I think it was a good idea. Let's split this across a few episodes. So now we've introduced you to what it is. And so in today's episode, we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the biases they're referred to and what those are, so that we can educate you on what you should be looking out for in yourself. And so you're not getting stuck in one of these biases that are all, and I was thinking about this after we finished recording the last one, like, for you at home, you shouldn't be taking this personal in any way. If whatever we say here or something we said, you're like, oh, that's me. That's exactly what I did. And I feel bad now. It's like, we all do it. We're humans. Like, we literally, no matter, like, it has nothing to do with you or anything. We literally all do this. And so we're hoping that by doing this, this series, that we can kind of just make you aware of it. So at least the next time it happens, maybe you can pump the brakes a little bit and go, oh, I'm doing that thing that Greg talked about on the podcast.
That's exactly right. And it's really what it comes down to is, kind of at the very tip of the hierarchy of needs, right, is self-actualization. And that is being able to regulate your emotions, being able to be kind of look down on yourself, almost like a third party, and recognize when things are happening and recognize when feelings are popping up and taking a moment and saying, okay, I see that. I see what I'm doing here. This is why I'm doing it. This is how I correct it. And that's really what this is about, right? The rational investor, and what we help people to be, and what, our principal role, right? Yes, we're going to manage your investments, and we're going to do it well, and we're going to do all this financial planning for you. But one of the biggest things that we can do for people is to help them, help save them from themselves, because we all have these kind of inclinations. And it takes that, calm outside view sometimes to say, this is what, this is why you might be feeling that way. And this is how we, adjust.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great. And so, we're gonna outline some of these biases. I'm gonna cue you up with a couple here, Greg, and then we could go from there. But maybe the first one we could talk about is the loss aversion, the fear of losing out, or in common parlance now, FOMO.
I mean, that is, such a big thing in everyday life as well as just in finance as well, right? Like that affects decisions quite a bit, right? I mean, think about it in everyday life, FOMO, and it goes hand in hand with hurting, right? If you see everybody else at an event, I want to be at that event. Why aren't I there?
Yeah.
If you're on social media and you see you see a trend on social media, well, how come we're not baking sourdough bread? How come we're not raising chickens like everybody else seems to be, right? It's that you see that often kind of in day-to-day life, and you see it in finance as well, right? In loss aversion, it comes down to the fact that people weigh their losses, twice as much as their wins, right? So the pain that they experience from a loss makes a bigger scar, than mental, impact than the joy of a win.
Mm-hmm.
And that impacts decisions. And it can, if you let it, impact decisions negatively, right? Because sometimes you need the loss, right? That's part of being a rational investor. If you know when to sell and aren't afraid to take that loss and utilize that loss for purposes of offsetting gains, right? And putting those resources towards a better, more productive investment, then you're going to impact your overall plan. But some folks will hold on to losers too long, and to the detriment of their investments, to the detriment of their financial plan, because of that loss aversion, because of that not wanting to admit they made a mistake, not wanting to experience the pain or regret of a loss.
Yeah, and I mean it seeps into our everyday life, right? Like think about, for those of you at home, that one time you got stung by a bee, like now you're afraid of bees, but you didn't think about the thousands of times bees were around you that they didn't sting you, right? It was just that one time, just some happenstance that you got stung by the bee, and now you're afraid of bees, but really they're around all the time.
That's correct.
Yeah. So yeah, I think about that's an interesting way to look at it, right? And I think you're going to notice a trend for our listeners is holistically looking over time, but I think that's just thinking about that every day, right? It's like being scared to fly or drive a car, right? You're only thinking about that one worst case scenario or that bad thing that happened to you.
Right. And that's another bias, right? That's recency bias, right? Yeah. I mean, that's if you just saw news about a plane crash, right? Now in your head, well, the aviation sector, no good, right?
Right.
Can't invest in that. Or it's unsafe to fly. Like that recent event is made a big impact in your psyche, and you're basing decisions on that recency, even if it may not be supported by facts and supported by evidence.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and I think about that a lot. And not just with financial things, but just in life in general, right? And try to think about that, because I think even, and this is something for those of you at home, like now, now that you start thinking about this and start focusing on it, even though it, man, fighting that feeling is still so hard. Like you're like, come on, man, be logical about this. Like I know, like this isn't real.
You're hitting it right on the head, and that's so much of what this is are things that as rational human beings, right, which is at the base of all of us, we know. And I mentioned this in the last podcast. It's that emotional intelligence, that emotional stability, the emotional awareness that I think sets apart, the strong investor, from others. It's what a good financial advisor will provide to you during times of chaos. That is that kind of emotional stability. And it's really going to be and it really is already proving to be the difference maker, in workplaces kind of across all sectors, because AI can't provide that. Not yet. We haven't reached the singularity where where the computers can talk us down off a ledge. But a good emotionally stable and kind of seeing the forest advisor can.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's it's one of those things that I think falls, and you could speak to this too a little bit as a lawyer for so many years, right? It's one of those things when you partner with someone who has an expertise in a field, right? They bring this calmness and kind of this like status quo to it, because we were talking about this last week where you're like, hey, I've only been here for doing this for 7 years and I've already seen the increase in this. Someone who's been doing it 20 or 30 may be like, oh yeah, that happens all the time, right? And so just having the ability to partner with someone who has seen this before, who's a little emotionally disconnected from, not you, but that problem, is just like really makes things so much easier.
Well, it really does, and there's studies to support that as well, right? The experienced investor, for instance, is going to be less affected by the ups and downs and volatility in the market versus a younger investor that went through the financial crisis of 2008, right at the beginning of their kind of investing career, has been shown to be almost permanently risk averse, right?
Yeah.
Much less prone to an equity focused portfolio, than an experienced investor who has seen multiple, kind of black swan events, and they know that you don't have to take these drastic, knee-jerk reactions in the other direction. You'll still come out of it with a diversified portfolio, with a solid portion allocated to equities. So yeah, it's that experience.
Yeah.
That the kind of the years in the saddle, I think, of weathering some of these storms that leads to that emotional
stability,
intelligence.
Yeah. And I think to your point, that's actually one of the biases that our listeners have to watch out for, is that anchoring bias, right?
That's right.
Getting stuck at the start of when they bought something at a certain price, or maybe they started in 2008, right before things went south, and that's now in their head forever as what this looks like.
It's exactly right. That anchoring is kind of honing in on a certain point in time, right? Whether it's what you bought the stock for. You see it in real estate. Both realtors and sellers and buyers, hone in on the last purchase price, what the house sold for. Or you get this, right? My neighbor's house sold for $400. Therefore, my house is worth $400. Well, that's discounting and kind of excluding all kinds of information, right? Like, does they have 5 bedrooms? You have 3. They had a brand new roof. Yours is 25 years old. All these different, evidence and fact points get excluded when you anchor into that specific price. And you see that in stock prices too. Well, I bought it at 20. I can't sell it for less than 20. That company could be they could have gone through massive change, right? It's just not even the same company anymore. That what you bought it for is irrelevant to the current status of that company's financial health.
Right.
So you have to base the decision on not this arbitrary, point in time or arbitrary price, but what's currently the reality.
Well, and that goes along, right? That's a tale as old as time, I think, because that's our parents always told us, hey, first impressions are always the most important, right? Because that's how people are going to remember you,
and they stick,
and they stick just on that first impression,
right?
Like, and so it's a real thing out just in the world that happens, and this is no different than that. And that's that first impression that you as an investor have had, or your first recollection of the news was this good or bad thing that happened. And you're just, well, that's how it is.
And we see it in all sorts of, things. And you see some of these biases kind of transcend the finance field, and you see them in other ways as well, like the hot hand fallacy, right? A basketball player makes 5 or 6 threes in a row. Well, they can't miss. Keep feeding them the ball.
Right. Yeah.
Well, mean reversion is going to happen at some point, right? This person, if they're a lifetime 35% 3-point shooter, they're not going to keep up an 80% make rate, right? It's going to come back, but that hot hand bias is, well, this can't stop. Give them the ball, right? We see that with stocks. This stock is going to the moon. It's never going to come down. Right. And then the reverse is the gambler's fallacy, and that's betting against it. Right. Like that's walking up to a roulette table and looking at the last 6 rolls, the last 6 spins were red. Well, it's got to go black. It can't continue to go red. Right. It's just it's the opposite, but similar kind of heuristic, similar kind of bias that can lead you to just the wrong decision. So these are all these things that seep into our decision making that we're all guilty of. We're all human. We all have these, mental scars that have accumulated along the way, and it makes us feel and think a different way. And like we've said, the best thing you can do is kind of stop, step outside yourself, look down at what's happening and say, okay, I'm feeling this way, but this is probably not, a permanent thing. Like, why am I feeling this way? What's at the base of it? Oh, it's this. Okay. Let me get back to basics. Let me get back to facts, and kind of make my decision from there versus getting caught up in this emotion.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, the first thing that popped into my head when we were talking about that was, we were talking about shooting, and the hot hand was like your recollection of like Michael Jordan, for instance, where you're just like, oh, he was the best. He never missed a shot. Like he was a hero when I was a child, like my hero when he was a child, like Michael Jordan, like it was a big deal. And then you go back on YouTube and you're like watching some of the highlights of like a full game and you're like, wait, he missed shots. Like that doesn't make any sense.
He missed lots of shots. He missed lots of game winners. Like nobody made every game winner, but all we think about is those ones that he made at the buzzer, right? I mean, you think about those kind of legendary games against Utah and
the flu game, like all that stuff.
Right. Those are the things that stick in our heads, and we base it on that, right? You think about the greatest hitters of all time, and like, man, those guys could just always hit, but they still failed 6 or 7 times out of 10, right? I mean,
they had like 50 home runs out of what 300 games or something.
Right. It's a long, 162 game season. I mean, it's so we get stuck on these things, and we let emotions kind of play in, and that's what leads to maybe some decisions that aren't optimal. Yeah.
And some of that can then lead to the next one, which is herding behavior.
That's exactly right. Right. I mean, that's just that following the crowd. We talked a little bit about that last time, and that's how the bubbles can happen. Right. I mean, if you're, that FOMO, that fear of missing out, that wanting to join the crowd, we saw some of that during COVID, during the whole GameStop craziness, and everybody was kind of jumping on that train. Well, depends on when you jumped on that train and as to whether or not it worked out for you, right? 100%. Following the crowd does not always translate to success.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of these biases are magnified by the way we consume content and information these days too, right? And that's a perfect example of, a very popular platform doing something then it going to these news outlets who have to serve news 24 hours a day, so they need something to talk about. This is a what seemed like at the time a feel good, oh yeah, and now it's blowing up, but half the people, regular people who maybe weren't on Reddit or weren't part of that initial push are coming in at a very different time than when it all started, right? And they just wanted to be diamond hands and all the
Right.
shooting the moon, and they just, yeah, I'm gonna do all that, but they weren't there when it was $5 or what, $12 or whatever
No,
it started at, right? And
no.
so
And I think you lead to an important point there, and just the way that information is given these days, kind of the constant onslaught,
yeah,
right? It comes at you from so many different directions. And, when news channels and TV and internet, when it went to essentially around the clock, it kind of stopped being news and became entertainment, right? I mean, it's just constant,
mm,
whatever they can get content out of, they're going to throw at you. It might have a kernel of truth in
yeah,
there, but it's a lot of it's fluff, and people get caught up in that fluff.
yeah,
And
which,
our job is to try to sift through the
yeah,
noise and the fluff and return people to the basics.
yeah. And a lot of that, again, I'm going to do another slick transition into one of our other biases, but is the choosing now over later, the present bias, right?
Sure. That kind of hyperbolic spending, so
Yeah,
to speak. So, spend now, save later. It's that's a human, that's ingrained in human behavior, right? We are not naturally prone to looking out long term, right? It takes emotional discipline. It takes,
yeah,
a well thought out plan and adhering to that plan to take action today
yeah,
that will benefit, us 15,
right,
20 years from now. And it's, you have to kind of combat that on a daily basis. We all
yeah,
do
right,
as humans, right? We all, at Strategic, we talk about living a great life. And that's very important here. That
yeah,
is what we want our clients to live. We want our employees to live. That has to be a delicate balance between enjoying the most out of the present to the most responsible extent,
yeah.
but not to the point of irresponsibility, and then yet still keeping an eye on the future.
Yeah, and finding that way of, for yourself, saving that money or putting it into, your 401k or investing it not as a sacrifice, but as like a present
It
to your
is.
future self,
That's
right?
exactly what it is.
But it's hard. It's hard, right? Because you're like, boy, yeah, that's
But
nice.
I want this now.
But I need to, like, I gotta get groceries. I got this other stuff right now that has to happen. And I think just being realistic with it, and for me, a lot of what I've learned over my time here is about that balance,
Mhm.
right? And saying, yeah, no, of course you got to live today and take care of your family today, but there's ways to do this that isn't going to be as detrimental mentally for you, like to do this so that your future is also taken care of, right?
That's exactly right. And
It's
that gift to your future self is a great way
yeah,
to see it. I read where an effective tool is to use the app that shows you as an old person, as a, in your 70, if
yeah,
you're 50 years old, 40 years old, 30 years old, show clients a picture of themselves when they're 75, 80, to kind of drive home the effect that it's coming, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
coming.
yeah,
And showing that, kind of breaking through that present day bias
yeah,
of, and making them see the future
right,
more, helps them save more,
yeah,
right? And helps them give those presents to their
yeah.
future selves. Yeah.
Well, and also just for me, as someone that is kind of in that stage of life where it's trying to do both, it's about little steps too, because I think sometimes when we look at the future, when we look at retirement, when we look at wealth in general, right? Like wealth is a large word that feels sometimes incomprehensible, right? And you're going, and it's not about that. It's about doing small steps today to build that for your future so that you just have that great life, so that you're taken care of until you're 90 or 100 or whatever it is that you live to, so that you're not, you don't you don't get to that age and go,
shoot,
should have done that.
I kind of blew that.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's like that. Back to the Future, like when he goes back in time and gets the betting book, right? And he wants to make all the bets or goes in the future and gets all the wins, and then goes back in time to make the bets. And if I had bet this on the Knicks, or the Mets at that one time, I would have won. And so. And, well, you could do that right now. There's ways to 401k savings, investing in evidence-based investments like that. You could be doing that right now. And it's not going to be an instant win, but it'll be a long-term win. And, 20, 30 years, 10, 20, 30 years, you're going to have what you need to live your great life. So
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and it's not, that's another bias, right? That conjunction fallacy, like that, equating one thing with another thing. If I win the lottery, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the evidence doesn't play that out.
No.
I mean, most lottery winners have not gone on to a lifetime of happiness. They've, ended up kind of burning through it and more miserable.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things that come into play there. We try to instill with folks, let's put a plan in place. Let's look at the future. Let's look at your future self. Let's see what is possible at your current, rate of income, your current situation, assuming assuming a couple things. Revisit that plan often, but also checking in with them on the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Right? Because it isn't all, money doesn't equal happiness, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure people are healthy. We want to make sure that, that all these other factors in place are in place for them to live their best lives. And we believe very strongly in that. We want folks to, we want to check in with them on kind of all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's all part of it, right? And though money can help, it's just one piece of the whole puzzle that we need to look at.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we got another great one in the books here, and we'll be back next week with Greg again, and we're going to talk about actionable items and things that you can do to kind of avoid or lean into some of these behaviors.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Please see the full disclosure in our show notes for more information.